As teenagers, we've almost always been dared by a friend to do some kind of prank. Mostly these pranks are harmless.
I thought they were just pretending to throw things, but he wasn't pretending.
But every now and then, they can get out of hand, and the safety of those on the receiving end are in danger.
You can see these 3 kids right there in that alleyway hurling rocks at cars. Somebody's going to get hurt doing this.
Suddenly, what seems like a harmless joke can go very wrong. Which is just what happened to this group of young men when we take a look at the case of the teen whose prank ended in brutal murder. Across America and Canada, a disturbing new trend has become popular, especially with rebellious young teenagers.
They say there was a group of kids on the top of that hill pelting large rocks all the way down towards a row of cars. It was so bad, some people had to duck for cover.
Overpassing, as it has become known, involves a rather sinister way of winning the game.
It happens out of nowhere. A rock flying right into your windshield.
The aim is simple. Hit a moving car on a road or freeway, either from the sidewalk or from an overpass.
Here's another one. In a split second, lives are changed forever. These were accidents. Now imagine if it was a deliberate act of mindless stupidity.
Some drivers are coming face to face with objects much bigger than rocks.
The Department of Public Safety says that someone has been throwing cement blocks at cars on I-10.
And the results of this devastating game can end up in disaster.
Shattered windshields and shaken drivers. You're looking at damage caused by yet another rock thrower in King County.
In recent years, the media have started reporting on incidents of overpassing.
This 20-year-old woman was driving when a rock came crashing into her windshield. It killed her. Authorities say it was not an accident. Within 45 minutes, a total of 7 cars were assaulted with rocks.
Some motorists have become so frustrated at these acts of vandalism that they have taken the law into their own hands in order to put a stop to it. One such incident happened in Vancouver, Canada on May 8, 2022. Numerous motorists driving along Nanamino Parkway called 911 to report a dangerous game taking place. 2 unnamed teens, 12 and 13 years old, were throwing rocks at cars driving below, placing those on the interstate in grave danger. At least 4 cars had been damaged, but amazingly, nobody had been hurt yet. The windshield of one vehicle was shattered as 2 rocks crashed into it, terrifying the driver and passenger. The quick-thinking driver pulled over, and after he checked his passenger was okay, he decided to apprehend the culprits himself. The officer in charge described the scene when they arrived. We responded, and at that same time, another motorist had taken it upon himself to get out of his vehicle and come up behind the boys and prevented them from leaving. He actually stopped them. He made a citizen's arrest and held them for a few seconds until the police officers arrived. And this would not be the first time a member of the public had to intervene to stop this chilling game in its tracks.
Tonight, the man suspected of terrorizing drivers on I-5 this weekend is locked up, thanks in part to the victims who fought back.
In July 2023, another incident happened in King County, Seattle, where drivers on Interstate 5 suddenly found themselves bombarded from above. The perpetrator was Gerald Kachowski, who was throwing rocks at passing vehicles just near exit 163. As several damaged cars pulled over to the side of the road, the drivers spotted Kachowski and band together to take him down.
I called 911 and I said, listen, we have eyes on the suspect.
He and the other drivers found the rock-throwing suspect not far from the scene.
So I ran up a small embankment into some brush and found a person just kind of squatted down underneath some blackberry bushes,
keeping him in place until Washington State Patrol arrived.
Kachowski had no previous convictions, which might explain why he received a relatively light sentence of mischief. But let's hope it's enough to make this prankster think twice before endangering lives again. Not all drivers are lucky to escape unharmed, and there seems to be no stopping this disturbing trend. Perhaps one of the most notorious stretches of road for reported incidents of overpassing is Interstate 75.
These are not uncommon events throughout the state and really throughout the country. Rock throwing events happen quite often.
The I-75 was the scene of not one, but 2 cases of this daring trend that both had a tragic and heartbreaking end.
I buried my mother, my father, and my oldest brother in the last 4 years, and this is the hardest thing I've ever did in my life.
White was a father of 4 children and had recently gotten engaged. He worked as a construction worker and was riding home with his co-worker Stephen Armther after a long, hard day at work. It was Armther who drove through Vienna Township, just north of Detroit, that the most unexpected and no doubt nerve-wracking moment of his life occurred. Armther not only worked with White, he was also the best friend of his father. Above the I-75, 5 teenagers, McCaden Payne, Trevor Gray, Alexander Miller, Mark Kachowski, and Kyle Anger were throwing objects into oncoming traffic. Kyle Anger was the oldest at 17 and was also the one to throw the biggest rock down onto the unsuspecting car below. They had collected a selection of rocks and loaded them onto a flatbed truck before driving to an overpass and choosing their spot. They were competing for money, and each hit would increase the winning pot. The boys had already done damage to many of the passing cars, but that was nothing compared to what was coming.
Police say White, a construction worker, was getting a ride home in a Ford Econoline van around 8:30 p.m. last Wednesday. That's when a 6-pound rock, about 5 inches wide and 8 inches long, was allegedly dropped from an overpass and crashed through the windshield. The father of 4 was struck in the face and chest.
Less than 5 miles from his house, and next thing I know, I'm pulled over trying to keep him from bleeding out.
After managing to pull over to the side of the road, he called 911 to desperately ask for help.
Okay, do you know what my name is? No, I have no idea. We're driving along, coming down a little bit, and something hit through my windshield heading.
The injuries to both White's head and chest were absolutely devastating, and he was taken for emergency medical treatment. But it was what the boys did next that shocked everybody.
You can sugarcoat it any way you want. I believe that premeditated murder is, you have thoughts of it prior to. They went and picked up the boulders. They knew what they were doing.
The 5 teens fled the scene, but these boys didn't go into hiding. They had other ideas altogether.
Officials say after the incident, the suspects went to McDonald's.
While they were eating burgers, police at the scene of the crime found all the evidence they needed.
Investigators say they found at least 20 rocks on Interstate 75. One weighed more than 20 pounds.
On closer inspection, police found that they had also been throwing pretty much anything they could get their hands on.
Investigators believe the suspects also dropped a tire and car engine parts from another overpass nearby, damaging other vehicles.
One of the boys was questioned the next day at school, but released without charge. And at this point, they must have thought that they had gotten away with it. That would all change on October 20th when the 5 responsible found out that Kenneth White had lost his life as a result of the catastrophic injuries the trauma had caused.
He was declared dead on arrival at the hospital.
It's not a prank, it's second-degree murder.
White's family was completely crushed by his sudden death. His mom struggled to come to terms with the tragic circumstances that led to her son's brutal death.
This is devastating to me. I'm lost. I'm lost without my child. That's what he looked like before the accident. This is him. Okay? That's my baby boy.
Armther later spoke about his heartbreak over being unable to save his friend's life.
I don't blame myself what happened. I blame myself like I couldn't do enough.
Stephen Amthor says Kenneth White's death left him feeling angry and numb.
Meanwhile, instead of doing the right thing and turning themselves in, the 5 teens tried to cover up their tracks. They exchanged a series of incriminating text messages, telling each other to lay low and keep their mouths shut. One of the boys wrote, "We could go to prison for life for this. Everyone lay low and no one rat us out." And another replied, "No one saw us. If everyone shuts up, we won't get caught." However, investigators had already identified the vehicle used in the crime, which led to them checking out the surveillance footage from the fast food joint that the teens visited after the crime. All 5 teens were soon identified, and by October 22, 2017, the police had contacted the families of each of the 5 perpetrators. But then they faced another problem. Although Payne, Gray, Miller, Kachowski, and Anger now had warrants out for their arrests, as they were juveniles, they could only be asked to surrender. They had until 10 p.m. the night of October 22nd to walk into a police station and turn themselves in. They turned themselves in by 8 p.m.
Good morning. The teenager who prosecutors believe actually dropped the rock is 17-year-old Kyle Anger. He's the one being held here at the county jail. The others are at a juvenile detention facility. They were all arraigned yesterday and are being tried as adults.
Despite the seriousness of their actions, their legal team wanted to paint a different picture altogether. They tried to divert attention away from the actions of their clients and go for the sympathy vote.
Frank Manley and Fred Myers represent 2 of the defendants, Mark Kachowski and Trevor Gray. How's your client doing?
Scared. He feels devastated for the victim and the family.
I think there's been a public rush to accept that these kids are bad, that they're almost animalistic, and they should be punished as such.
But would this be enough to get these reckless young men off the hook?
The 5 teens charged with murder appearing in court today, 3 of them being granted competency evaluations.
They were all deemed fit to stand trial and would come face to face with a judge.
The 5 teenage defendants were expressionless as their lawyers entered not guilty pleas for them.
My client has no criminal record whatsoever.
Their distraught families watched the proceedings. So did the grieving father of Kenneth White.
If convicted, the accused could face life in prison, a punishment White's father does not think fits the crime.
Even if they spend 30 years in prison, they get to wake up every single morning. They still get phone calls from their parents. They still get visitors. My son don't get none of that no more. That was taken away from him for something stupid.
It was Anger who could be facing the longest time behind bars.
The evidence and testimony in the case pointed to 18-year-old Kyle Anger as the one who planned the prank, loaded up his pickup with the rocks, and threw the rock that killed. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. 4
of the 5 teenagers accepted plea deals to reduce their sentences and would accept manslaughter charges. By 2019, the defense team were arguing the accused should be tried as juveniles and tried to get them off any way they could.
That Mr. Anger does have a history of issues, both bipolar disorder issues, as well as ADHD and ODD, which is known in the profession as oppositional defiance disorder.
During the trial, Anger tried to justify his actions, saying, "We just weren't thinking what the outcome could be of it, and just doing dumb stuff." That dumb stuff would come at a heavy price.
The charge is very serious here. We're talking about second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit second-degree murder, 6 counts of felony malicious destruction of property, along with some misdemeanor counts of that.
The defense argued that if their clients were convicted, they should only be sent to juvenile hall, something the judge strongly disagreed with.
The proposal for juvenile sentencing is rejected.
Naturally, the defense team were furious and made their feelings perfectly clear to a waiting media where they pulled no punches.
Rulings like this get people elected.
You think it's political then?
I think laws of treating juveniles as adults is political.
But then, the most unexpected twist in this case happened, leaving everyone shocked beyond belief and giving the accused a sign of hope.
The Michigan Court of Appeals says a Flint area judge exceeded his authority when he blocked how 4 teens would be prosecuted in a deadly rock-throwing case.
With a successful appeal, the defense could present their case again, knowing they have a chance to get their clients off lightly. If they were convicted, this decision would dramatically reduce the sentences they would receive, except for one of them, the only one who is 18 years old at this point, Kyle Anger.
They sought to have manslaughter charges dropped against 4 and move their case to juvenile court so they could get rehabilitation services available only in the juvenile system.
Mark Kachowski, Trevor Gray, and McCaden Payne were given 1 year's probation and 100 hours of community service. Alexander Miller was sentenced to 333 days incarceration, and as expected, the one who threw the rock that caused the fatal blow would come off worst of all. Kyle Anger was sentenced to 3 to 20 years in prison, with time served of the 740 days he has served so far. In January 2021, the case would come into the spotlight again, and for all the wrong reasons.
Kyle Anger, the oldest of 5 boys charged in the deadly I-75 Clio rock throwing case, will be released on parole this week. That's according to sources from attorney Mike Manley. Anger was convicted of throwing the rock that killed 32-year-old Kenneth White in 2017.
Understandably, White's family was devastated and must have felt let down by the justice system.
And he called my brother while sitting on the side of the road and cried, said, "Listen, I'm so sorry. I tried to do my best and I couldn't stop you from bleeding."
And then, only a few months after the White incident, on the same stretch of interstate, tragedy struck again. December 19th, 2019, 4 boys, Pedro Salianis, 13, Demetrius Wimberly, 14, Sean Carter, 14, and William Parker, 15, were crossing an overpass above the I-75 near Toledo, Ohio. They spotted a pile of rocks and decided to throw them at passing vehicles. Not satisfied with rocks, they decided to up the stakes and grabbed some nearby sandbags. It was after one of the boys dropped a second sandbag onto the road below that they were shocked to hear a loud bang as it landed on the windshield of a car and shattered it. 22-year-old Marquis Bird, a resident of Warren, Michigan, was traveling in the passenger seat of a friend's car. The sandbag went straight through the windshield and landed on Bird's head, causing a blunt force trauma that left him in critical condition.
911, where's the emergency?
I just put out of the bridge and something hit my car. It hit my friend and he is not moving.
Bird spent 3 days in the hospital, but despite the medical team's best efforts to save him, he eventually lost his life.
This case is a tragedy. It happened just before Christmas. Now a young man is dead and 4 teens are charged with murder. Police say they spotted the boys running from the scene, and this morning 5 families are shattered.
The family of Bird later spoke of their turmoil over the tragic and unnecessary loss.
Funny, humorous, handsome. You know, he didn't even begin to live his life. My heart just actually truly went out to them because I don't think they know the impact from what they did.
Right after the incident, the 4 boys casually went to get some candy, and as they were walking back over the very same bridge, they were met by waiting police. The very next day, Pedro Salinas confessed to being the one who dropped the sandbag, and he and the others would face some serious charges for what started as a harmless prank. Bird left behind a fiancé and a 2-year-old son.
Family and friends say it was who Bird was and what he stood for they'll forever cherish.
The trial would come under spotlight by the media, and everyone wanted to see justice for Bird and his family.
The state will be bringing forward some sort of side charge on all 4 of the youth that were involved.
Almost instantly, the case was compared to the Kenneth White incident, giving even more exposure from the media and causing anger amongst the community.
His death comes after another harrowing case in which 5 teens in Flint, Michigan were charged with second-degree murder after police say they flung rocks off this overpass on the same highway.
The 4 accused would stand before Judge Denise Navarre Cuban, where they would have to answer for their reckless behavior. The pleas that this was a simple prank gone wrong were dismissed by the judge, who said this was not a prank. Throwing things off an overpass is not a prank. As the one who dropped the final blow, Salianas would face the most serious charge of taking a man's life, while the other 3 would plead that their actions were involuntary.
If I was sitting on the other side of the courtroom, that I feel for them as well.
Each of them were found guilty as charged, but when the sentence was delivered, outrage followed. Lillian Diallo, a Detroit-based attorney for the family of Marquis Bird, stormed out as the judge faced the courtroom and told them he was not sending the guilty 4 to state prison. Instead, they would head to Lucas County Youth Treatment Center in downtown Toledo, which has an average stay of only 8 months. Diallo was understandably furious, saying, "What madness is this, where we don't have to take responsibility for whatever age we are? What is this? How would you feel, losing your own family member only to discover that the ones responsible would serve less than a year in rehabilitation?" As you can imagine, the response was not pleasant. Each of the 4 boys have now been released and are free to roam the streets as if nothing happened. But the authorities made some effort to stop this from happening again, as they installed fencing along the interstate that was supposed to prevent anyone throwing rocks onto the traffic below. Hopefully, these safety measures will stop other families from going through the same heartbreak as those in today's case.
Certainly have to hope that other young people watching this will learn from their mistakes.
Let me know what you think about this case in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications to keep up with every chilling case.